everyone, and thank you for viewing another one of these orchestrated chats where we get to talk to a specific performer about writing for their specific instrument. And today I'm really, really fortunate to have a tremendous performer that is amazingly active, especially during our given times. Performer who splits their time between New York and Tokyo, clarinet, Hichiriki, lots of fantastic stuff. Can you please welcome Thomas Piercy?
Thank you. Nice to see everyone. Thanks for having me
Great.
here.
Um, I had a chance to write for you a little ways back, and I've admired your work from afar, from a mutual friend, and just seeing how active and varied your work is. So I was really excited to have you in particular talk about this, as opposed to another person who is just doing orchestral work or just doing one other vein. I feel like your approach to clarinet is a lot more varied and, for me at least, I think a lot more interesting.
Well, not to insult orchestral players. Um, I did that when I was 19. I was playing in the Richmond Symphony, and it had been my childhood or high school dream to get into an orchestra. I thought that's what I was going to do, and I quickly realized within a couple of months that I really did not like the job part of it. Of course, orchestral music was I mean, to play a Beethoven or a Brahms in a full orchestra is incredible. But
Sure.
I quickly realized that that person standing up there, the conductor, he has control over everything or most of.
Mhm.
I have very little control over dynamics. Uh, Almost no control over tempo, pacing, phrasing,
Mm,
even repertoire. As a clarinetist, would not be choosing the repertoire for the season,
sure.
and that was frustrating for me. And I thought, okay, I'm 19. I know I do not want to be doing this for a long time.
Mhm.
So I said, okay, solo and chamber music. And then through my teachers who were soloists and had at one time been orchestral players, and they also
Mhm.
branched out. And I found it very interesting to be able to play solo clarinet pieces. Most of what I do is clarinet and piano, and then other
Mhm.
times bringing in other instruments, but playing your traditional classical music. A lot of
Mhm.
what I do is new pieces written for me, like the piece you wrote, and working with composers, especially at the beginning stages of a piece. It's nice because I feel like I have some, depending on the composer, I have
Sure.
some creative input into it, and that's I've been glad to be able and really fortunate to be able to have done that.
Mm. I really love that sense of agency over choosing your own rep, but
Yeah,
also musical choices of,
yeah,
well, I really like this line from this particular piece, but I can't take it at that tempo because the conductor really wants to push forward there, even though I feel it should pull back,
right.
or dynamics or different things like that, or balance. So that's a really great insight into, as a performer, what you're drawn to, even if you still like a lot of those orchestral works just as a listener. Um,
Oh, yes.
and
Yeah,
even probably as a player, but there's a sense of agency over your choices and over your work.
yeah.
That's a really great insight to that. With these chats, usually one of the first questions I ask, just to get a feel for what folks like to do on their instrument, as you started sharing, what is it that's something that you love playing on your instrument?
Uh, the number one thing is I love to play long lyrical lines
Mm,
floating even if it's a solo piece, but if it's like clarinet and piano, just this long lyrical line over sort of a thick texture, so there's
mhm,
all this sound under me, and it can be static, just whole notes or chords, or it can be chugging along. And if I just have this floating sensation, and it can be something that is tonal, or it can
sure.
be something that's absolutely atonal. I started out as a singer. My
Mm,
main clarinet teacher was Gervais de Payer, And he started out as a singer, and his teaching method was more of a teaching you how to sing through the instrument.
Hmm.
And I've always liked that sensation, even if it's something very angular. I try to make it what I just call lyrical. That's my
Absolutely.
favorite thing to do. And the clarinet is so incredibly well suited for that. It has, of course, just an incredibly large range, and it can play incredibly soft, probably maybe softer than almost any instrument. I mean, you can
Absolutely.
just start from niente, nothing, and just sort of blossom the sound. Then you can also go the other way. Often when I'm playing with other instruments, and I am a nut about the dynamics,
Sure.
extremes, especially. I mean, we can all play loud. Playing loud is easy, but
Sure.
I'm like, can we get softer? Can we get softer?
Yeah.
And really trying to get them to push or agree with me to get softer and softer
Mhm.
as much as we can. So that's my favorite thing to do on the
I
instrument.
love that, and I love that sense of over something as well. The last one of these I did was actually for an oboist, and they had a similar take of that continuous long line. And I think part of that's the mechanics of their instrument as well, with some relief of that back pressure
Right.
of just this long line. But for clarinet, it makes just as much sense, especially depending upon what's underneath it. And that's tremendous. I love that it paints a picture, and I'm so intrigued by the singing background potentially playing into that cantabile sort of sensibility,
Yep.
even if it's an angular line, still seeing the through idea. So that's tremendous, and something clarinet does exceedingly well,
Yes.
which is helpful. You never want to have that, and then your instrument just doesn't do that.
Right.
So
It would be
that's
very frustrating. Yeah.
very, very frustrating. I get
Yeah.
that. So with that, that in mind, and just that sensibility, what are some missteps or missed opportunities that you've seen from just composers in general, and then specifically some newer composers and orchestrators and arrangers?
Okay. I won't mention any names, but I think one, if the composer or an arranger, if they know who they are writing for, and I'm
Mm,
talking that is at the top, that is the preference. I would hope for both the
sure.
composer, arranger, and the person who's playing. If you know them, or if you know they're playing through, the internet recordings or whatnot, and
Sure.
you can hear what they do well, or you can ask them uh, at at the very beginning or somewhere. I will, when composers ask me, what do I want? And I remember Ned Rorem was writing his first
Sure.
clarinet and piano piece, and it was for me. And he asked me, "Well, what do you want?" And I'm thinking, how can this man, knowing who he is, and he's a friend, but
Yeah.
still, as a composer, I said, I'm not telling you what to write. And I actually, even 10-year-old composers, generally don't tell people what to write. But I told
Mhm.
him, I
Sure.
said, okay, simple. I want something soft, quiet. I want something loud. And I want something fast. And I want something slow. And I figured that
Sure.
covers everything. Uh,
Absolutely.
but now I have learned to go further than that. Um,
Especially
if
with non-Ned Rorem composers.
exactly, and if you if you want something that is double tongued all through the piece at some super fast tempo, write it for someone else.
Sure.
It's not something that I do very well. It's also something I don't particularly like when I hear
Sure.
other people do it. It's just
Mhm.
I'm just not that interested in it. Um, and basically, that will be the one that I will specifically mention to them.
Mhm.
Another one, a technique that I will often say, if you want a lot of slap tonguing, especially
Mhm.
on the clarinet, not the bass clarinet,
Yeah.
um, it's not something that On the clarinet, I do so well basically because I know how I do it on the bass clarinet and it's much
Sure.
easier. And if they're putting it all, they get obsessed with wanting this sound that maybe they've heard on another piece, but
Uh-huh.
they want it all over the place. So I just think knowing the performer um, really helps. And if you have that opportunity to speak to the performer or listen to their recordings, if you have that opportunity and you don't take advantage of it, that's a big misstep.
Sure.
And I find I never mind when a composer is coming to me asking me questions or sending me like a measure or a phrase. Even if they ask me, can you record this?
Sure.
Just a simple little recording on your iPhone. And I want,
Hmm.
because they want to hear back. I have no problem with that. I actually like it because then we're working back and forth,
Yeah.
and if it's something that they think I don't sound good at or it doesn't meet what they want, then they
Sure.
can change it. So the finished product makes us both sound better. So that I think is something that a composer can miss out on and is a misstep if they don't take advantage of that opportunity.
Interesting. That's
Yeah.
so much of that's to do with a really well-rounded collaboration, right? To
Yes.
where it's the pre-compositional idea of I want to know who I'm writing for,
Right.
and what they do well, and then within the piece as well to get that back and forth can make so many different choices about. It's making it to where it's not just writing a new piece for clarinet, it's I'm writing a new piece for Thomas, I'm writing,
Right.
and that personalization is, I think, always preferable. I don't know of any situation to where I've been like, oh, I would rather just do it for a stranger. um, and my experience with having pieces performed is so very frequently, if I get to work with the ensemble before, or if I know some folks in the ensemble, the care is usually there in the follow-up for that premiere or those performances. So I love that sense of collaboration kind of being at the
Right.
core of it. It just ends up helping all together for so many different reasons.
Yeah. Even if a piece is sent to me and the composer and I both think that, okay, it's delivered, like I call it, it's delivered, it's the final piece.
Sure.
Even then, if they have not talked to me beforehand, uh, I think 99% of the composers I have worked with, if I come back with something, or if I just say, this is great and I'll work on it, or if there's some issue, whatever, it could be technical. It could be a high G that has a flutter tongue on it that just isn't going to work.
Sure.
Um, Almost every composer I've worked with then accepts, okay, this isn't a finished piece. There
Sure.
are a few through the years who have said, no, this is what I wrote.
Hmm.
This is 100% what I want and no changes. And then I sort of take it on myself as a challenge to try to do that,
Mm.
because even since I was in school, pieces that were considered like unbelievably difficult to play,
Hmm.
now 13-year-old people are playing because we have
Yeah.
stretched our technique. Like when I was in school, the Nielsen was thought of as the
Oh.
pinnacle of a technical impossibility to play. And
Hmm.
now, yet you have high school players playing it.
Sure.
So that it's a challenge to me. And then if I really do try it and it's not working, then I will go back to the composer and say, okay, I can do everything, but maybe like that high G flutter tongue. Um, Either I will do it and it's going to sound bad, or let's figure out something that will try to make it sound like what you have in your ear. And we'll
Hmm.
give them, pick up my clarinet and make different sounds until, and then usually they go, that will work. It's a compromise. It's not what they wrote, but it's a compromise. And again, it makes us both sound good.
Yeah, no, I love that. And within this class for orchestration, I always talk about working with understanding and working with the mechanics of the instrument, so that way if you do something different, you're cognizant of doing it. So if you're
Right.
writing that high G that's flutter tongue and I realize I don't really have much room to actually do that thing, well, figuring out what else can you do. Is there a growl? Is there something else timbrally to get that thing that you're looking for? But just even being aware of it's so helpful, and that's where that collaborative spirit with the performer will fill in some of those gaps in
Yes.
your own judgment and your own knowledge.
Yes.
Yeah, that's excellent. Um, Thinking over the massive amount of music that you have play and continue to play, what are some pieces or composers that you might recommend to very fresh new composers and arrangers, of just to see some different ways of writing for the clarinet, um, some of those high lines, some of those technically challenging lines, but things that you feel, as we say, lie really well on the horn?
Right. Um, this is a question I'm often asked for these types of classes. And I remember the first time I was asked, and I gave an answer in a split second, and it is still my answer, even though now I've had a, is for someone to go and listen to the Copland Clarinet Concerto.
Yeah.
It, to me, I mean, no, it doesn't have multiphonics. It
No.
does not have flutter tonguing. It does not have slap tonguing. Any of these, what we used to call extended techniques, although I just call them techniques now
Just
because they've been used for
contemporary. Yeah.
so many. They are no
Yeah.
longer extended,
Absolutely.
or even. But that piece, um, it has incredibly soft lyrical lines. It has these lines that the great thing about the clarinet is the range. So you can have this super low note that just floats up very soft to a super high note. Um, it has long, long, long lines where you need to have big lungs. It also has short lines. It has a jazzy section to it.
Mhm.
It's got some rhythmically tricky. I mean, not so tricky, but some rhythmically tricky things in there. It's got some very fast, little wiggles and runs,
Mhm.
and it's got some glissandos in it and some very, very fast stuff. So to me, without going into the more advanced contemporary techniques, it pretty
Sure.
much has everything. Yeah.
No, that's tremendous to hear. That was, I always think of a couple of pieces that I'll usually ask if they're not mentioned, of players, to come to mind. Like, these are pieces I always thought of for this, but how does it actually play for you as a performer? The Copland Concerto is one of those pieces.
Right.
So that's
I
that's
mean,
great to hear.
yeah, I mean, you could say, of course, the Brahms, but
Sure.
there's not super fast stuff in it.
Hmm.
Rhythmically, it's pretty straight with duples and triplets. It doesn't have these giant leaps in it, whereas the
Hmm.
Copland has what the Brahms has, with just it has some very simple melodies and very lyrical lines.
Sure.
And that could go the same way if you mention the Mozart,
Hmm.
which yes has everything in it, but there you still, for the modern ear and the modern player, you want something more.
Something else to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I love that. Um, the other way, since we're talking a lot of concerti and a lot of orchestral type playing, do you have any pieces that come to mind for either solo or chamber work, since that's a lot of the place that we're working in right now?
Um, let's see. Good question.
It's a tough. I was
uh,
going to say, maybe I can even help. The two pieces that came to mind initially
yep.
for me was the Copland and then the Stravinsky, the three pieces for clarinet. I'm
Oh,
always
sure.
intrigued as to how folks. Those are pieces I love as a listener, but I went through a woodwind techniques course a ways ago as an undergrad, and so I could probably do some scales, but otherwise I'm not playing at that level. So those are pieces I like as listener. But how does that sit for you on the instrument?
It's a great piece, and again, it has that slow first piece, if you want to call it, and then the very angular with ba-da-ba-dee-ba-da-ba-da,
Yeah.
all over the place, and and then really kind of a jazzy throw in,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
um, and it's not so long, and it's that so each of the pieces, once you start it, you just go.
Sure.
It's also one of those pieces. I probably played it the first time when I was maybe 17 or 18.
Hmm.
For me, it's a type of piece that if I had to, I have not played it probably in concert, maybe 10 years. Uh,
Sure.
but if I had to play it tonight in a concert, I could. Uh,
Sure.
it it um, it fits well under the fingers.
Mm.
Uh, you you know, for me, once I learned it, it stays in the ear. And of course, I've had to play it through the years. I've also had to coach it with students. So it's one of those pieces that stays in the ear, and
Sure.
it stays in the fingers. The range is perfectly fine. It doesn't go up to any super high notes.
Hmm.
There's no there's some of course there's some tricky little runs in it, but they are easily worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And far as chamber music, another good one that's fun is the trio version of the Stravinsky uh, Histoire de Soldat.
Oh, great.
Instead of the full version, because some of the in the trio, a lot of those, the trumpet parts put into the
Hmm.
clarinet and all of that.
Yeah.
So the trio version has all of that, and especially for the very crisp rhythms that you have to play with another person.
Yes.
With the three pieces, you're not playing with anyone else. So if you're a
Hmm.
little faster or slower, it doesn't matter. And
Yes.
also the Bartok contrast,
Okay.
which has beautiful long lines, but a lot of very, very technical runs and difficult stuff, and some almost jazzy kind of sounds to it. And again, where there are places in that where you have total freedom with what you're doing, and then a lot
Hmm.
of times where you have to line up with the piano and the violin. So if you're looking at the score, you can see where those places are. It's a great score to look at.
Oh, I love that as a reference point, and I think that even though they're pieces from a similar time period, several of those, with especially the Stravinsky, the Bartok, and the Copland, they come from such different. They come at it from such different perspectives that they
Yeah.
still have so much overlap, but then they're so different. But still, I love that, and I love the mentioning of the trio version of Soldier's Tale because I never would have thought of that one. But yeah, they have to be covering some of those other parts that are
Yes.
missing from the
Right.
Fuller group, the nonette or whatever it originally was for.
Yeah.
Um, all of that fun stuff. I'll have to check that out. I haven't heard the trio version of that. My mind as a percussionist is wondering how are they dealing with all of that stuff.
Right. Yeah.
uh, but still, lots of interesting ideas there. Thank you so much, Thomas, for taking some time out of your day and sharing a bit about your perspective on the instrument. And I think it's been a really helpful chat just to get some folks thinking about how they're writing and how they're collaborating and taking ownership over what they're doing. And I thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for having me, and good luck to all your composers and orchestrators on writing great parts and pieces for clarinet.